Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, a show about writing and publishing with your host, J.F. Garrard.
Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven. Today we are speaking with author Alice Fitzpatrick. Alice contributed short stories to literary magazines and crime anthologies and has recently retired from teaching in order to devote herself to writing full-time. I think she's living the dream, really, people. She is a fearless champion of singing, cats, all things Welsh, and the Oxford comma. Her summers spent with her Welsh family in Pembrokeshire inspired the creation of the Meredith Island Mysteries. The second book in the series, A Dark Death, will be released in June 2025. She's currently working on the fifth book in the series while looking for a publisher for a standalone suspense novel set in Massachusetts and inspired by a horrific accident that killed 8 teenagers in her hometown of Oakville, Ontario 50 years ago. The traditional mystery appeals to her keen interest in psychology, as she is intrigued by what makes seemingly ordinary people commit murder. Alice lives in Toronto, but dreams of a cottage on the Welsh coast. So welcome, Alice.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit. So you were a teacher before this? Okay.
Yes, it's amazing how many writers were once English teachers. I was an English teacher. I taught ESL, drama, and I was also guidance counselor.
Wow. So now you are living the dream of being a full-time writer, as most writers do. So you're working on the fifth book. So how did those 4 other books come about? Like what inspired them and how did you start writing?
I've always been a writer. I think writing is how I interact with the world, how I perceive the world. I'm a storyteller. Other people will say, sorry, I'm late. There was a problem with the streetcar. I will say, sorry, I'm late. There was a problem with the streetcar, and then talk about it for the next, 10, 15 minutes in great lurid detail. So I was quite a lonely child. I'm very introverted, and I basically wrote short stories in order to create a world where I would feel comfortable and accepted. Um, I I wrote tons and tons of short stories. One of my two favorite books. I ran out of stories in those books. Pippi Longstockings was one of my favorite books, and Alice in Wonderland, because they're both kind of women who go out there and are really kind of strong and adventurous. When there were no more books, I started writing my own.
Like fan
So
fiction.
I guess it was fan fiction. There we go. I don't have a name for it, but thank you for that. I wrote tons of short stories. I wrote my first novel when I was 13 years old. I was studying ballet, so it was sort of my fantasy becoming a ballet dancer. I wrote poetry. My first publication was to be in a high school collection of poetry edited by George Bowring. And I also got my first rejection notice when I was sort of in grade 9, grade 10, when I sent a skit to Carol Burnett, the Carol Burnett Show. And it's
Oh,
still
you're
my
ambitious.
favorite
My
rejection
goodness.
notice. When I went to university, I found that I was working largely out of the sort of the logical side of my brain, and I wasn't being very creative. And when I graduated with my teaching certificate and went into teaching, I was so busy marking and prepping classes, I didn't have time to write, because I'm the kind of person who needs a long period to write. I can't just grab 5 minutes here and there. So I started writing. I really, when it was during the summer holidays, I was able to write. I was writing short stories. I published literary short stories in the 90s. And then I said, I really want to write a novel. And I grew up reading Agatha Christie and all that kind of stuff. So I really wanted to write a mystery novel. But then there was the academic part of me that is still hanging on from 3 university degrees, said you really have to go and study police procedure and forensics and all this kind of stuff. And I just kept putting it off and putting it off until I said, I got to do this. So I wrote the first book, Secrets in the Water, which was based on a short story, a long story, a 40-page story I'd written maybe 20, 30 years before. Never throw anything out. and it was then a 14-year-old girl who learns that her aunt committed suicide. She goes back to to the place where the aunt lived, which is a seaside resort, and basically tries to investigate. So I took that, aged my protagonist to my age at the time, and placed it in Wales because that's sort of my sort of soul place, because the English side of my family comes from Wales now, and just kept working on it, and the rest is history.
So how long does it take you to write one book?
It should take me a year. That what happened with that book is I kept going back and revising it because I wasn't getting any positive reinforcement from publishers and agents, and then I just started writing more and more books.
So
But
the first four books, like how are they self-published, or did you find a publisher in the end?
I found a publisher in the end. I
Okay.
should have gone to Canadian first.
Okay.
I was I was doing everything I could to get noticed by publishers. I was sending stuff out. I was trying to get, I actually got an agent and then lost the agent because she couldn't sell the book. In the meantime, I got working directly with publishers. I got 3 publishing offers,
Mhm.
two of which were really bad contracts. Um, and I was entering Twitter pitches and anything to get myself noticed. And I got my current publisher, Stonehouse Publishing in Edmonton, from the first, and as far as I know, only Canadian Twitter pitch.
Mm-hmm. So how do you find out about these? Are you just on Twitter a lot?
I follow a lot of different organizations. So the whole Twitter pitch thing is fairly well known in the industry and among people who are looking for agents and publishers.
Okay, but I mean, when you start with a publisher, would they not publish the rest of the books? Like if it's a series?
Yeah, but Stonehouse I got about a year and a half, about 2.5 years ago. They were the first people who actually wanted to sign me.
Okay.
So they've published Secrets in the Water, and they're bringing out the current book, which is A Dark Death.
Okay. Now, like, are all of them different? Like, can they, like, do you have to read from the first book?
No, they can stand alone.
Okay. Okay.
The first book is actually a cold case. It's Kate trying to figure out what happened to her aunt, who reportedly committed suicide, but nobody on the island believes that she did. And the second book is a current crime.
Right. Like earlier, you were talking about how when you were younger, you want to create worlds to live in. Like, you're writing like murder mystery here. So, like, what appeals to you about like crime novels? Like, why are you doing, why write crime?
Okay. Um, I've always approached crime novels like, as I was saying, I was raised on Agatha Christie. I'm actually English, so I was raised on Agatha Christie, and I approach crime novels as puzzles. I know other writers see it as trying to put the world to rights and justice and all that stuff. And I'm not into it on that level. But what's interesting for me was I was a third of the way through writing Secrets in the Water, the first book, when I realized I was in fact writing about my own family.
Hmm.
My father's Polish. Um, so I never knew the Polish side of my family. So half my family I never knew. They lived behind the Iron Curtain during the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So I honestly, my father never talked about them. At one point, he whenever he talked about his family, he said something different to each one of us, my sister and I. And at one point, he told me that we were white Russian, fled during the revolution, went to Poland, changed our name to a Polish derivation. And for about 3 or 4 years when I was a teenager, I thought I was somehow descended from the Romanovs.
Oh, wow.
But I've had my DNA done. We're not Russian. But the English side of my family, um, the people who eventually moved to Wales, my uncle, my mother's youngest brother, died while she was pregnant with me, so I never knew him. His son, my cousin, well, only one of two cousins, isolated himself from the family for about 50 years. So we lost touch for about 50 years. And then my great aunt, my grandfather's sister, went to live on the Isle of Man and really didn't really communicate with anybody. So our family kind of shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. And I realized that I was writing a book. The first book was about a woman searching for her family history.
Mm.
And that's what I've been doing is, why did all these people leave? What happened to these people? Why don't I know these people? Why, do I have such a tiny little family? So sort of, yeah.
Oh, that's
So
very yes.
what I was doing in that book was trying to come to terms with I want to know in my books, not only who done it, but why they did it. What was the motive? And it's sort of like putting puzzle pieces together, because only when the puzzle pieces are together can you get the full picture. I've never had the full picture of my family. So
Yeah.
my approach to writing novels is writing crime is slightly different.
Well, I was thinking like the way you're describing it is very British. Like I grew up visiting my friend's house. Their family's English, well, English and German, but we watched a lot of BBC, and like the BBC stuff is very different. Like the crime stuff, it's not very flashy, and it's not CSI Las Vegas. I mean, like right now, oh gosh, what are we watching? Is it Shetwood? Well, anyhow, it's like, like a BBC mysteries. Like the detectives are very quiet, like not quiet, but you know what I mean? Like it's realistic. Like they're not gonna go in with guns blazing and like, it's not like, and if you're using drugs, you're not gonna like, it's not like it's like in your face. It was a very different way of showing up. And even when someone's arrested, I think we were watching some new Agatha Christie series, like the guy's like, "Oh yes, I did it," and then you figure they'll get arrested later, but I mean, there's no scene of them really getting arrested and stuff. But anyhow, I'm just
I
thinking,
show
like,
people getting arrested.
yeah, yeah, okay, okay. Now, for people that want to write mysteries and crime, like, do you think you've learned over the years? Like, what kind of advice would you give them?
You are never going to, if you're putting it off because you need to know everything as far as police procedure is concerned, you're never going to sit down and write. And that's was my problem. Like, I have to know all this procedure, and police procedure changes all the time. Um, there's so much stuff people can now do through their computers that they couldn't do before. And so go ahead and write it. If you there's something you really want to know about, there are groups on the internet that you can ask. And I have listened to Cat. I have listened to uh, uh, ex-police officers who are also crime writers who say that yes, sometimes in a small town it'll take you 3 to 4 months to get the blood analyzed and all this kind of stuff. But they said whatever you write predominantly serves the plot, because crime is plot oriented predominantly. So you can't write a book and then, have Kate go off and write, because she's a history novelist, go off and write a book and come back when they get the DNA results back, which could take months. So I mean, I always try to have my crime um, solved in about a week to 10 days. And I don't think the average police, if there's any police people listening now, correct me, but I don't think a lot of these test results are going to come back within that time period. So just go ahead and write and see what happens. And there are people who write books like MC Beaton, who wrote the Agatha Raisin series, who didn't involve the police. It was all private. It was all sort of amateur detective. So I guess it depends where you want to go. If you want to write a police procedural, you probably need to, although I have heard the D.L. and Pascoe, Reginald Hill, I think it was, who wrote D.L. and Pascoe, apparently admitted he knew nothing about police procedure when he wrote that series.
Okay. Okay. So what are you working on next? Your book 5 is finished, right? Are you writing a sixth book?
Book 5 was supposed to be finished. The one thing I have learned since publishing the first book is you spend an inordinate amount of time marketing and
Mhm.
publicizing,
Yes. Yes.
and doing podcasts. And I mean, I make the joke, and especially since this is my first book, and it takes 4 to 5 books really to get a following for a series. I mean, I will show up, I make a joke, I'll show up at the opening of an envelope if I can promote my book. So I'm basically doing everything I can to see what works and doesn't work.
Well, definitely. Like marketing is, like nobody really knows what works or doesn't work. Even if you hire someone to do it for you, like it's hit and miss. A lot of opportunities. So, but thank you very much for talking to us about your history, and we're gonna hear a bit of a book reading now. Now, before you start reading, Alice, could you give us a little bit of context, and then you can start reading.
Yes, I was going to do that. Thank you for reminding me. Um, so, on a small Welsh island, a team of archaeology students have arrived with their professor to excavate the remains of a medieval monk's cell. But they found something much more interesting, what they believe is the remains of a Roman temple. After celebrating with the islanders the previous night, they have to gather themselves together to resume their digging. And this is the scene. The students were spread out at the tables the pub landlady had set out for breakfast. Tristan had finished eating and was quietly reading, waiting for the others who seemed to be having trouble facing a full English this morning. All that is, except Mvanwi, who, no matter how much she put away the night before, was able to eat anything anyone put in front of her. Noah and Poppy were sitting together by the window, looking out over the harbor, their plates pushed to one side. Poppy was absently chewing on a plate of dry toast, crumbs littering the table. Simon poured himself another cup of coffee. He looked peaky, Tristan noticed, like he hadn't slept. Tristan couldn't imagine what was going through Simon's head. On one hand, he was on the verge of the most important discovery of his career, yet it was in an area of which he had very little first-hand experience. He couldn't go much further without calling in an expert in Roman buildings and artifacts. If only he and Freya was still married, or at least talking, it would have been the perfect partnership. No one knew the truth of why they'd split up. There was no lack of rumors around the department, her affairs with other faculty members, students even, Simon's jealousy over her soaring career. But who wouldn't have a stellar career growing up under the tutelage of Sir Oswin Davenport? She'd probably been born with a trowel in her hand. She and Simon seemed an unlikely couple, but at some point it must have worked for them. Tristan wanted that, a woman to share his intellectual passion. You eating that kidney? Mvanwi pointed her fork at Jude's largely untouched plate. Take it all. Disgusting things, internal organs. And Jude pushed the whole plate toward her. Mvanwi speared it with relish. I like a good kidney, me. Puts hair on your chest. And she slipped her hand down Jude's shirt. He uncharacteristically pushed it aside. I've never had any complaints about my chest. Neither have I. Simon stood up and cleared his throat. Right, if everyone's finished playing with their food, let's be off. He threw packets of paracetamol onto the students' tables. 2 of these, a bottle of water, and some fresh air. That'll bring you round. It was very irresponsible of you to get into this state when we have important work to do. We were celebrating, sir, said Noah, and they would keep buying us drinks. Yes, of course, and I'm sure you wouldn't want to insult these good people, so you felt compelled to drink them. Jude popped a couple of tablets into his mouth and looked up at Simon with red-rimmed eyes. Sarcasm doesn't become you this early in the morning, Professor. And a hangover doesn't become you, Mr. Carlyle. Let's go, you lot, if you could manage to put one foot in front of the other. Given that most of them would have rather stayed in bed, they were making fairly good time. Simon wasn't sure if it was the fresh air or the tablets, but they were picking up speed, starting to chat rather than grumble. A gray sky hung over the island, and this had given Simon pause for concern. They were only here for a few more days, and he didn't want to lose even one day due to rain. But he also didn't want to contaminate the site by working in a downpour. Once Julian, the landlord, had assured him that despite the heaviness of the sky, there was no chance of precipitation, Simon began to get excited about the day's work. As he came down over the rise, he saw the welcome side of the blue tarpaulin, still anchored by large flat stones as protection from the wind and rain. But parked beside it was Griffin Blackstock's motorcycle. If that bastard had done anything to his sight. Simon was eager to make sure the trench was undisturbed. All right, let's get the cover off. And they laid the anchor stones to one side and each lifted a corner. A gull suddenly shrieked over their heads, so loud it almost drowned out Poppy's scream. Lying face down in the trench, arms outstretched to form a cross, was a naked body.
Ooh, the body. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, and good luck on your writing journey.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
For more upcoming episodes of the Artsy Raven about writing and publishing, visit us at jfgarrard.com/arpodcast. A reminder to Patreon subscribers that there is bonus content available for every episode on the Patreon website. If you enjoyed the show, you can show your appreciation by buying us some digital coffee. The Artsy Raven is produced by J.F. Garrard. The voice in the show's introduction is Chris Gorman, and music is by Tim Moore. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe.